Hello and welcome to the Intentional Brief, your weekly video update on the one big thing in cybersecurity news for middle market companies, their investors, and executive teams. I'm your host, Shay Colson, managing partner at Intentional Cybersecurity, and you can find us online at intentionalcyber.com. Today is Monday, October 20th, 2025, and we're going to get a look at some real life struggles around business continuity and disaster recovery, or BCDR, today, brought to us by AWS. So the big story around the internet today is, ironically, that a significant portion of the internet is unavailable due to what we now know is a DNS error in Amazon Web Services' US East 1 region. Beginning just after midnight this morning, on the 20th, AWS began experiencing what they call service impacts, and while the term might seem somewhat generic or benign, I can tell you that the impacts were far from it. According to their own published updates and timeline, it took several hours to identify the root cause and push the mitigations, and more hours still for those mitigations to work their way through these deeply interconnected systems that we use every day without even thinking about it on the modern internet. DNS, or domain name services, are actually what serves as the bridge between reconciling when you type in a domain name like Amazon.com and the actual IP address that your computer needs to communicate to in order to retrieve that web page or application or data. And when that's not available, then your request fails, and so does your page load or your app load or whatever else. In this case, it also caused a cascade of failures both within AWS itself, on the services that are built on top of those DNS tools, and across thousands of companies and their digital estates today. The BBC has been doing a good job of tracking in this sort of live blog style the impact that is so common in these kind of ongoing incidents. And they note that some applications took more than 6 hours to come back online, and others are still offline even many hours later. The challenge here is that we take modern infrastructure for infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, IaaS or PaaS, the components underneath for granted because their operational capabilities are typically so robust. In many ways, we don't even think about what an outage might mean to our business, or if we do and we consider the cost of running in multiple availability zones or regions, we would see that as a significant increase in not only cost but also complexity. I think it will be very interesting to see what business leaders decide to do after today's outage, which came early in the morning here on the US side, even for the East Coast time zone, but squarely in the middle of the workday for the UK and many others. Couple this with the fact that US East 1 is Amazon's oldest and largest region within AWS, and that the initial issue caused a raft of downstream, further complicating issues. And then everyone in the tenant rushed to restore at the same time, which continued to be difficult on these impacted services. And you can see how issues like this can spiral. But as we so often do on this show, I think we should come back to working to understand those things that we can control and accepting the risks inherent in utilizing these sort of arrangements. While outages do happen, they are extremely rare for AWS or any of the other hyperscalers like Microsoft's Azure, Google's GCP, or others. The alternative, of course, is that you add significant cost and complexity into your own environment to either run in multiple clouds, run in containers that can be moved from cloud to cloud, run on multiple availability zones within the same cloud, or keep failover infrastructure otherwise available, whether that's another region or in a colo facility or even on-prem. I think while it sounds like a good idea to have this fallback plan, to have this other infrastructure you can leverage in these moments, it's often a significant point of diminishing returns because it creates so much significant overhead and friction when you encounter just the regular care and feeding of IT systems like patching, updating, deploying new software, backups, rotating hardware, or a myriad of any of the other mechanics that AWS abstracts away for you when you leverage their platform. Beyond that, they have site reliability engineers and other responders who are able to engage with these issues at a speed and scale that we are highly unlikely to match here in the middle market. So instead of moving away from the cloud or moving away from AWS, I would encourage you to consider the fallback or alternative approaches for your critical workloads, thinking through, of course, ways in which we have either knowingly or unknowingly adopted these single points of failures. But also think about what it looks like to accept that risk and plan for contingency events while you wait for AWS to get back on their feet. I know this is not always what we want to hear or what we want to tell our executive team, our board, or our shareholders, but sometimes it's still the best path forward. Think about instead putting your energy into building a robust recovery playbook to help you get back online as quickly as possible when something does happen, and what you need to do in the meantime to minimize the impact, whether that's proactive customer communication, alternative engagement models, or something else. I think the cost and complexity of building redundant infrastructure, if you are operating at scale, is very rarely worth that effort compared to how many other things we can do with those resources. From a fundraising perspective, another tip-top week with newly announced funds totaling more than $26 billion and putting us at over $116 billion in newly committed capital for the quarter here, just a few weeks in. To be fair, the vast majority of this week's new capital comes from Ardian, who raised $20 billion for their fifth infrastructure fund, which will mostly be focused on Europe. But for some additional context, if we have another week next week like we had last week, we will have raised more in October than all of Q3 combined. As usual, I find it kind of hard to read the tea leaves on all of this, given the macro uncertainty in some very important areas, whether that's the ongoing sanctions battle between the US and China, now involving rare earth elements, the ongoing war in Ukraine, the government shutdown here in the US, or any number of other things that are seemingly going sideways, and yet the fund announcements just keep coming. A reminder that you can find back issues to the articles that we covered in the comment section below. You can find written transcripts and archives of these videos at intentionalcyber.com, and now sign up for our monthly newsletter, The Intentional Dispatch, at intentionalcyber.com/newsletter, and we will see you next week for another edition of The Intentional Brief.